will stab myself.
Writer-director Peter McLeod brings us First Moon. And this is an Australian werewolf movie with a bit of a religious twist. Now, let me give you the setup here. It focuses on a young woman who, at the beginning of the movie, we see has been abducted by a religious cult. And they are actually hunting down people who could be infected with a kind of werewolf virus. But in this universe, a werewolf virus can be passed by kind of an STD, like a sexually transmitted disease. And they want to try and pray the werewolf away by any means necessary. But they're quite brutal. Even people associated with this woman may well, face their wrath. And there may be a number of victims who potentially could be werewolves. And it's up to this young woman to, is she a werewolf? Has she done something she doesn't think she has? To try and figure out what has happened and can she fight back? What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So the idea being is that this religious cult have to try and expel the werewolf curse before the first turning, so before the first moon, hence the title. So, let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. I have to say it's a interesting and original idea for a werewolf movie. In this day and age, there's plenty of ideas that I think are done multiple times, and we see, different takes on the same old story time and time again. So it is nice when we see filmmakers try something a little new with the genre and have a new twist on, a classic kind of Wolfman style movie, and obviously having it with a kind of a new way of transmission. I mean, I think this is the old ways as well, but they're just like another way to kind of get it. So I guess you could say it's like Wolfman meets It Follows. It's an interesting idea. Maybe purists won't be quite as fun, but it kind of makes sense. I think it sort of makes sense if you think about it. And obviously, it really focuses more on the kind of this religious sect who are kind of using totalitarian means to get what they want, ultimately, than the actual kind of werewolf self. But, that is in it, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So it's obviously a different take, different sort of priority, really, from the filmmakers here. And, it's an interesting idea, I have to say. And, this poor girl, she's none the wiser about what's happening to her. She obviously gets a flavour of what's to come as the film progresses. So the werewolf itself, now you're going to expect there's going to be a werewolf in this. It's not going to be a spoiler. It's on the poster. It's kind of hinted on the synopsis. It's in the trailer. So yes, at some point she becomes a werewolf. So let's talk about what that looks like. Again, it's a slightly different look for a werewolf. I have to say, it kind of looks more like a sort of Nosferatu-style vampire. But nonetheless, it kind of looks bestial and stuff, just lacking the kind of the hair in that. In actual fact, she loses what hair she has got. So it's an interesting kind of take. Arguably, maybe not a wolf, but, still sort of bestial looking. And the practical VFX here is pretty strong. The werewolf, if you want to call it that, suit looks good, looks bestial, and it's fairly unique looking and impressive. Add to that, there is some reasonable gore effects through the movie. The werewolf isn't the only reason for a bit of gore here. We do see some gore effects from actually caused by these churchgoers here, who, as I say, are going to use any means necessary to get what they want, and some of that does include some gory scenes. So again, these are achieved practically, and the makeup effects look pretty good. The movie has an interesting. This is not necessarily a positive, I'm going to say, but I'll give it some props for having a kind of unique look to a degree. The majority of the movie is very dark. It's all kind of like in this place where they're keeping their hostages. So it always has a sort of a dingy look to it, but it's juxtaposed where this girl is having kind of flashbacks, remembering what has happened to her, which are kind of like soft focus and have this kind of like sheen on it. And these kind of like almost ghostly effects where she's able to mentally communicate with other people, potentially other kind of like pre-werewolves, if you like. So we have these sort of two sort of styles really that give it some sort of visual flair. Let's talk about what doesn't work. Now, I have to say, that all sounds pretty good, I think. You know, it sounds interesting. But I've got to be honest with you, I was disappointed with this movie. Why? This is nearly a whole movie of conversations in dark rooms. Like 95% of the movie. Conversations in rooms. Is this an asylum picture? God damn it. Even they don't have 95% conversations in rooms. And we're talking dark, dingy rooms. It is really not interesting to look at. Visually speaking, this is a very, very drab movie. And most of all of the werewolf action is 5 minutes to the end of the film, really. It's a very dull visual movie. And I gotta be honest with you, the actual storyline and the characters aren't particularly engaging. It's just effectively religious people shouting at these other guys. Mainly our main girl. That's basically it. And her, you know, and we get a little bit of, say, context with the flashbacks and stuff. We'll come on to that. So, and I gotta be honest with you, I didn't think the acting was particularly strong, unfortunately. This being a character piece, a drama piece more than anything else, you need good writing and good acting, really, to make it engaging. And I didn't think it had either of those. I wouldn't say it's the worst ever on either count, but the writing isn't particularly engaging. It's kind of, like I said, it's mainly just kind of this woman getting dragged around, getting tortured by these kind of religious types and shouted at and things like that, and then her complaining about it or talking to these other kind of people. But it's not really sparkling dialogue. It's not really dynamic. It doesn't really kind of draw you in, and the performances, I've got to say, aren't the best. They're a little bit on the kind of hammy side at times, a little bit overbaked, and not particularly engaging. I mean, I think our main girl is a little better. She's a good screamer, I'll tell you that, but not exactly thrilling stuff. So let's talk about these flashbacks. I mean, I got to be honest with you, I think this movie would have benefited from having a linear storyline. The flashbacks look artificial because of the way that it's filmed. It's kind of like, has these kind of filters on it that give it like this kind of soft focus and these kind of like sort of overexposure to a degree, and kind of look all like almost dreamlike. And she sort of inserts herself into these flashbacks as she's looking at her own life from a third person, and it's this horrible digital effect that really sort of stands out. So it's like, oh, this looks a little bit like ropey, I've got to say. Practical VFX good, digital VFX not so good. And that goes, I mean, these outside of the flashbacks, where I think there's too many, and I think it would have just benefited this story to build it up a little bit more in a kind of a linear fashion, rather than kind of having the majority of the movie in this kind of like religious compound and just a few flashbacks that kind of tell, you know, you can guess where it's going for the most part, but it's just that there's a little bit too many of them. Have it done in the linear way, and you know, you could have set up the story a little better, I think. And then we have these ghostly conversations. I thought that was stupid. It was just ridiculous. And it looks terrible. It's like these digital, like, composites of these kind of actors sort of talking mentally. It just looks terrible. It looks terrible. You know, and like I said, until the end of the movie, we're not really getting the werewolf. It's not a practical suit until we get right at the end. And it's like, okay, so let's talk about that problem. You know, we know where this movie's going to go right from the get-go. Like I said, it's on the poster, in the description, in the trailer. We know that there's going to be she's going to turn into a werewolf because we've seen the advertising for it, and it would be a pretty pointless movie if it didn't happen anyway. So the whole kind of preamble until that point, it's like, we know what's going to happen. We know that she's going to turn. We know that the church isn't going to basically be able to cure her. So the whole, like, idea here is really undercut by its own premise, because we know what to expect. Therefore, the rest of the movie is kind of pointless. And then, as you say, the werewolf is not in it very much. Disappointingly, the kills from the werewolf sometimes off screen, so when we do get it, it's like, do you know what, it's kind of like, we don't see much of the, I mean, you do see some, but like, it could have been better, it could have been a little bit more spectacular. I think the idea here is the movie wants to end on like a high point. It wants to end with the VFX showcase, and, you know, great. But, you know, it's actually quite a boring movie, I've got to be honest with you, up until that point. And I was like, oh man, I'm so checked out of this film by this point. So, I think the idea of this movie is solid. But I think the execution of how it's turned out was dull as dishwater. And VFX, practical VFX, are done well. And I like the original ideas, but horrible digital effects that really kind of spoil that. And it's the digital effects are the first scene that you're going to see here. And it's like, oh God, that was rough. So I got to be honest with you, I really struggled to finish this film. I did finish it, so that's hence why I'm reviewing it. But such a disappointment. I got to be honest, and such an interesting idea squandered in such a lackluster movie. It's a 3 out of 10 for me. This was a bit of a rough one for me. Would you see it? Does it sound interesting? Have you seen it? Please let me know your thoughts, and I look forward to seeing you next time.